Good evening. Welcome to the Newsmaker interview series with Dr. Marvin Olasky. This evening we have the privilege of welcoming Ismael Hernandez. Ismael is the Executive Director of the Freedom and Virtue Institute, an institute that focuses on individual initiatives, community involvement, individual freedoms, and values. Let's join me in welcoming Dr. Hernandez.
Well, thank you for coming. And you and I share some nefarious background in common. As some of you know, I was a communist during my early 20s, and Ismael was a communist in Puerto Rico.
Yes.
At that time.
Yes.
Tell us about growing up in your family and with your father, Juan.
Sure. I grew up in Mayagüez, Puerto Rico in the 1960s, 70s, and my father was founding member of the Puerto Rican Communist Party. And he was one of about 15 men who founded the party in 1959. And our home was about revolution. My father was very active with the party. He left an extensive FBI record, which I have with me. Through the Freedom of Information Act, I was able to get it. And he was consistently talking about revolution, making us read, making us listen to the never-ending speeches by Fidel Castro. 7 hours talking. That's quite a task.
And you had to listen to all 7 hours?
Yeah, it was required listening at home.
Yeah.
And he was always shouting his revolutionary slogans and making us study. He was a very sophisticated man intellectually. And I grew up hating the United States, hating capitalism and blaming capitalism and America for the poverty that we saw around us. And the FBI was always there in front of our home. I never forget the night out to meet with these two men who were always there in the car. And we found out later that they were FBI agents, and I hated them. I hated them because they were hurting my family. That's the way I saw it. And I hated America for the bad marriage that my mom and my dad had too, because my father was only interested in revolution, and my mom about how to feed the 4 kids she had at home without a job, because my father could not get a job. Every time he put an application for a job, the FBI will come and he will not get the job. So that was the kind of environment I grew up at home.
And when he did have a job, he worked at night a lot, is that right? So you didn't see him all that much?
Exactly. When he had the job, it was a night job, so it was seldom I could see him. He was not very engaged with our lives. It was all my mother. However, when he was engaged, it was to teach us something. He was very good in that, and to teach us about revolution, about socialism, about how to defeat America. He will make us sell propaganda, the newspaper of the party. I will go with him to the communist cell meetings. So our life was all around socialism and how to defeat the United States.
And you admired him, as I understand. You admired him and
absolutely.
wanted to be like him.
Absolutely. I remember the night when, again, my mother was crying because my father will tell her all the time that he will give the lives of the 4 children that we had at home for revolution. And my mother will start crying, very hurt, and we will come and console her. But in the back of my mind, I agreed with my father. I wanted that kind of zeal, that kind of commitment to a cause that really attracted me. So I agreed with him, and eventually I joined the party with him. And was very active, especially in the University of Puerto Rico. And I made a commitment to that cause.
What was involved in joining the party?
In Puerto Rico, we did not have a formal process. It was simply being active in events of the party. I did that all the time. I worked for the party in the elections as a poll worker, and was involved in the meetings. So there were records for attendance and things like that. We never had a card system as you probably had here in the United States.
Right. Now, I had a card where every month when I paid my dues, I could paste in a little Lenin stamp with a picture of Lenin there, and yeah. Were there particular activities for young people involved with the Communist Party? In the United States, there was the Young Workers' Liberation League.
Yeah. No, we joined later at the university. There were groups that were socialist for university students, but not before that. We were just members of the party, and as young people, we will do the menial activities that like selling the propaganda, the newspaper, helping during events. My home became the hub for having meetings in the community. The leaders will come, we will arrange the chairs in front of our home, get some speaker phones, and they will speak to people, and we were always engaged in that.
And at the university, what did you major in? What was your
political science?
Okay, and were the political science professors somewhat Marxist or somewhat conservative?
Mostly conservatives. Most of them were for American involvement with Puerto Rico, either as a state, they were pro-statehood, or for the Commonwealth. There were not many for independence professors at the university. I learned my ideas at home and within the party. So there was no professor that I emulated or that was with us and supported us in our cause.
And sometimes you went to church with your mother?
Yes, well, that's one of the things. My father did not believe, but my mother did. Although my mother will say, well, we're whatever he says we are. You know, in the 1960s, women were subservient. So whatever the husband says we are, we are. However, she would sneak us to go to Mass with friends without my father knowing about it. You know, he would not have allowed it because religion is the opium of the people. It keeps you thinking on heaven where the capitalists are having a good time here on earth. That's what my father will always say. So she would sneak us to go to Mass with friends. And that's how I began to create like a double consciousness in me. On one side, revolution and socialism. And on the other side, this idea about God that attracted me, but I still had that commitment to socialism. Yeah.
Now, liberation theology was very popular at that time,
yes.
And throughout Latin America.
Yes.
And at one time, you thought about becoming a Jesuit priest yourself.
Yes, exactly. Later on, as I grew up, I decided that I wanted to try the Jesuit order. One of the reasons is because they were all Marxists. It was almost a requirement to be a Marxist to be admitted into Jesuit seminary. Mm-hmm. So I decided, you know, maybe I can reconcile this double consciousness in me between religion and revolution by becoming a Jesuit and then playing religion and at the same time becoming a revolutionary. And my father, who was not a believer, was excited about it, because he knew the Jesuits. So eventually I went to a retreat and I joined the party. I mean, joined the party. Joined the Jesuit order. I requested that one of the main revolutionaries in Puerto Rico attend my entrance. Was Father Padilla, who was a Marxist, a socialist. And I admire him, and he was there the day I was admitted in Jesuit seminary. So I involved myself in the life of a Jesuit seminary, and I was looking forward to go to study philosophy in Latin America.
And then what happened that you did not stay with the Jesuits?
Well, in the 1980s, something happened, and the older ones will remember that 7 Jesuits were murdered in El Salvador. Again, as you mentioned, This was the time of liberation theology that was brewing throughout Central and Latin America. And the Jesuits were at the head of that kind of movement. So I was looking forward to go to Nicaragua to study philosophy. Nicaragua had a university, was right there at the border between Nicaragua and El Salvador. And we were going to be living precisely in that home where those Jesuits were murdered. And out of concern for us, that's when they decided not to send us to Nicaragua. And that was for me devastating because I was looking forward to study from the masters of liberation theology, Ignacio Ellacuría, Juan Luis II, Gustavo Gutierrez. Some of them taught at the university and lived in that home. And when that happened, out of frustration and upset, I quit seminary. I decided not to be a Jesuit priest because, I did not have a vocation to the priesthood. I was just, again, trying to merge that double consciousness in me. And I thought that the Jesuits were allowing me to have my cake and eat it too. When that was not going to happen, they told me, we'll send you to Fordham in the United States. And I said, I'm not going to America. I hate them. Why would I go to Fordham? And so that's when I quit seminary.
And how long after that did you go to the United States at the University of Southern Mississippi, of all places?
Yeah. Well, I went back to Puerto Rico to to teach in a small college, in a high school there for 1 year. And that's when I decided to come to America, to come to the guts of the monster, as we call this country in the party.
The belly of the beast.
Yeah, exactly. I decided eventually to go. And I have a friend who had gone to the University of Southern Mississippi. He told me it was very inexpensive in the South. He had friends who could help me while I was there. I decided, well, why not? And I decided to come to the University of Southern Mississippi to study political science, hating America still as a communist in the deep South as a black Puerto Rican. You can imagine what kind of shock was that.
And you went there was a scholarship there, or what? Why that particular? There was one person who had gone there, but still there are lots of other colleges.
Yes. Again, it was mostly because of the cost.
Yeah.
And I was planning to go only the summers, come back to Puerto Rico, save some money, and come back again, and maybe in 8 years, finish my master's degree. But because I had good grades in the first semester, and they called me one day to the dean's office and offered me a full assistantship, paying me all my studies. And I decided, well, I'm going to stay. But that's the beginning of changes in my life because, I hated their guts and they were rewarding me. I did not understand why this was happening. This was not supposed to happen. For me, America was the hell of the workers, and nothing good was supposed to happen to me. But the fact that they rewarded something that positive in me began to help me question the assumptions I had made.
And they did not demand that you stick to a particular political line and do propaganda. You were free to explore, to read, to think.
Absolutely. They never even questioned that. They saw that I had good grades. I went there barely speaking English and still had good grades, and they rewarded that. So that's the beginning of me understanding that America was more about the individual person and about the connection between reward and accomplishment. I can articulate that now. It was just an inkling at that time, but it was something that did not square with my ideology. Ideologies are like a pair of glasses you put on yourself and you look at the world through those glasses, and you and I can be looking at the same reality, and we interpret it in different ways because our assumptions are pre-rational. It's really like a mode of looking at the world. And not many of us have the opportunity of challenging those assumptions. And for the first time in my life, I began to question the assumptions of my ideology. And that's something I would have never done unless I come to the United States.
And you also met a a very special person in the cafeteria one
Yeah.
day. Did that have an influence on your desire to stay there also?
Yes, and my wife, she was studying marriage and family therapy there, and we met and eventually got married. In the beginning, she thought I was some kind of spy, communist spy.
Uh-huh.
But eventually we bonded and became husband and wife. But also something happened to me there was that not only did I discover that America valued the individual, which is very important because as a socialist I believe that my only value was if I am a faithful soldier of revolution. That's where my value comes. I'm like a small drop in the great wave of revolution. If I am a faithful drop and I do my duty, my life has value. If I don't do that, individuals don't matter. What matters is the collective, the group. But America taught me, no, you have value as a person, as an individual. And that was a discovery for me. I did not believe that could happen. And the second thing that I discovered was that what you Americans call poverty was a joke. I mean, compared with the kind of poverty I was coming from Puerto Rico, give me some of that poverty, I said. What you call poverty in America was not poverty in any other context in the world. And that was, again, another problem for me. Because, again, that was not supposed to be the America that socialism told me existed. And that created great turmoil in my consciousness.
And I gather also that some of the reading you did had a real effect on you.
Yes.
That sometimes students born in the 50 United States sometimes have to grit their teeth and make their way through the Federalist Papers or something. But this wasn't boring to you. This seemed to be very exciting. And what was exciting about it?
Because they were ideas that I had never explored before. They were ideas that were totally new and contradicted my safe assumptions and what I have learned as a socialist. And at the same time, they align with the experience I was living. And that's what is radically important for me. Before it became an intellectual quest, it became an experience. I experienced what being free is. That's what I always say, that my lungs were filled with the breath of freedom when I came to America. I just didn't know that was happening, but that is what was happening to me. At the same time, I was losing my father and losing all my relationships, because when you are a socialist, all your relationships are within the party. You don't have relationships that are deep outside of the party. So as I was losing my father because he couldn't reconcile the most radical of his sons becoming now part of the enemy, I was gaining this insight into this new literature that I was exploring, and this new life that I was enjoying myself in America. I wasn't supposed to enjoy being in America, and I was enjoying it so much that after 3 months, I didn't want to go back to Puerto Rico. So when they offered me the assistantship, I was very happy that was happening. But I was still a socialist. But that was the situation.
Okay, so you're still a socialist. You're feeling better about America. You're reading some of the basic founding documents. That's having an influence on you. And then you read Thomas Sowell.
Yes.
And particularly The Vision of the Anointed.
Yes.
That's a book, by the way, that I assigned to all my first-year journalism students at the University of Texas for several years. Tell us about the influence of Sowell, and again, for those of you who haven't read Thomas Sowell, what are your reading recommendations based on the way it affected you?
The Vision of the Anointed basically explained to me in concrete ways what I was experiencing in more emotional ways. He explains so well why people believe the way they believe. What is behind our rationality, and what is behind our assumptions about life, not just about politics, not just about ideology, but about life. And also, being an African American himself, he questioned my assumptions about race also. Before I read Soul, I will say, what's our problem as black people? You white people are our problem. You fix yourselves and we'll be whole. That was my assumption, that for us to advance as a people, whites had to change. But I realized, and Soul helped me realize, that I'm still a slave then. So in other words, my life and my success depends on you, not on myself. So what happens if you choose not to change? Yeah. Then I'm still have two alternatives: feel sorry for myself and sit down on the side and whine, or put my fist in your face and protest and be angry at the world. And those were my alternatives. As a socialist, I prefer the second one, right. My fist on your face. But that's not the way to live. And Sowell explains so well that there is a third alternative. And that's what I learned from him.
Okay, so then reading this, you're changing politically, ideologically, you finish your master's in political science.
Yes.
And then you go to Fort Myers, Florida.
Yes.
And tell us about the organization you were involved in then.
Yes. Well, after we graduated, we got married at the end of our master's degree, my wife and I, and we decided to start looking for jobs. I wanted to finish my PhD, but my wife was tired of college. She wanted to start a family, so she was the boss. So we decided to go to Fort Myers, and I started to teach for about 6 months in a high school, but that wasn't for me. And there was an opening in a ministry. It was called the African Catholic American Catholic Center, the African American Catholic Center of the Diocese of Venice, and I became the youth director of a black ministry there, and eventually the executive director of that ministry. And that reinforced my ideas. By this time, my father was at the end of his life. We were not talking. But before he died, he called me, and I went to Puerto Rico. And he told me, Ismael, I don't accept what you are proposing, and I don't even understand why you believe these things. But don't be a fence-sitter. That's what he told me. If that's what you believe, you better fight for it, because that's what he did all his life. He fought for what he believed. And I think that's what is missing in ministry, and I learned that in that ministry, is that Americans, we are bored in our affluence. And we are so bored that we start inventing new ideas and how to fix what is not broken. You have the ideas of freedom in your own society, and you are throwing them to the side in search of some other ideas, the ones I was rejecting, because you are bored in affluence. You have not experienced suffering. So you start trying to invent, as I always say, the best revolutionaries are those now that have an iPhone and a cafe latte on the other side, and then they're with the protesting against a society that allows them to have that kind of quality of life. And I saw that in that ministry, but in the inner city. You know what I was doing in the inner city? Giving people stuff. That's what I was doing. And we will give them stuff and more stuff and more stuff. We pay their bills, and under the weight of the free stuff we dump at people lies their dignity. Their spirit cannot breathe under the weight of the stuff we dump at them. And I was dissatisfied with that. I realized that I was part of the problem, not part of the solution.
And so, as you discover you're part of the problem, but still that's your job.
Yes.
You're supposed to be in charge of giving away stuff.
Yes.
What do you do at that point?
Well, I began to write articles in the newspapers, which created a lot of controversy.
Not politically correct articles, I suspect.
Not politically correct, and I got called to the bishop's office a few times. They kept telling me, don't be controversial, and I kept telling the bishop, I'm part of the problem if I'm not controversial. I'm part of the system I'm trying to change if what you want me is just to pay people's bills, give them things, and be happy. And I could be there for all my life, hiding in the church, getting a paycheck, and doing nothing, being part of the problem. So I began to write articles against affirmative action, for example. People couldn't understand how, I'm Puerto Rican, black, my wife is black, we're covered. But I didn't believe in that system. And I believe against Afrocentric education, against the welfare state. And that created controversy, of course. But our ministry was booming at the same time.
And the idea actually is that if you are of a particular skin color, you're not supposed to write things like that. You're supposed to all be falling in line.
Absolutely.
Somewhat like in Puerto Rico with your father. And so I suspect you rebelled against when they told you you can't write this because you're this and you must take this position. You said,
in other words, I am not my own person.
Yeah.
I'm like a cow in a herd. This is how blacks are supposed to think. I don't know how white people are supposed to think. If I get to know you a little bit more, I get to know how you think.
Right.
And that's what America taught me. I am an individual made in the image and likeness of God. I am unrepeatable and unique. I have rationality and will. I am my own man. I have my own ideas. You don't dare tell me how I'm supposed to think. I had an occasion, I was in a gathering of African Americans, Hispanics, and this black man, he's African American, and he comes and tells me, don't worry, Ismael, you were born in Puerto Rico, but we are the same, we are together, we came from the same mother, Africa. Then when I start talking and I disagree with his philosophy, suddenly I was not black, I was just Puerto Rican. My blackness faded away rather quickly, because for them, blackness means an ideological commitment to a certain set of ideas. And if you deviate from that, then you are less than. But my faith tells me it's the opposite, I affirm myself as a made in the image of God when I actualize my capacities as an individual. And that's the problem I think that we have in Black America, is that the last phase of the civil rights movement, to me, is rediscovering our individuality, putting race aside, forgetting about race, and looking at the person. Mm-hmm. And that is what we need to do. But we are, as you see what's happening in the country, we're going in the opposite direction.
So you've learned that freedom is important, that virtue is important,
Yes.
and you start an organization
Yes.
devoted to developing those things. Tell us about that.
Well, about 10 years after I was executive director, I had made many changes in the ministry, but I was still dissatisfied. I remember one day I was sitting at my desk and I was beginning to see, to come for food, the children of those I have been giving food for a long time. Mm. And I say, this is a sign of my defeat and that I am not doing the right thing. The children of those I have been given food are coming themselves for food. I'm part of that cycle of dependency. I knew I could not change that radically within the church. And one day I decided I quit. I just quit. I didn't have a dime, I didn't have a job, but I had the idea that we needed an organization that teaches principles. That's what we need to have, a foundation on the right principles to move action. And that's what the Freedom and Virtue Institute started. We believe that we have to go from the mind, a set of principles, to the heart, a care for the poor, and then into action. But what happens with many Christians is that we feel sorry for people and we move into action. And that's the problem. So we decided to start the Freedom and Virtue Institute to teach Christians and other organizations a set of principles that I learned coming to America that then help us to move into action the right way. That's basically what the Freedom and Virtue Institute is about.
And you have courses, you do
Yes.
teaching, you do lecturing.
Yes.
Tell us what a typical week of yours might look like.
Mostly meetings with people in churches. We are trying to recruit churches to go through a training we have. It's called Effective Compassion Training. We also have another training we call in commonality training. Instead of diversity training, we do commonality training, And that is based on the idea that, you do not appreciate people by learning how many things make you different than these other people. You can have a PhD in Guatemalan history and hate the guts of Guatemalans. Information about differences are not going to make you appreciate people. The universal commonality of human dignity, that is what motivates us then to learn more about people. If I appreciate you as a human being and as a friend, then I want to know what makes you unique. So we start with commonality, what makes us one, and from that we go into difference. Diversity is the opposite. Let me just give you very briefly a story. My daughter, again, she's covered, African American woman, Hispanic. She could go to any university with all expenses paid. And what she wrote in her applications for college when they asked her for her race was none of your business. It's none of anybody's business what is her race. And that's what we taught her. You had to see yourself as an individual. Because if not, when you go to a college, what they see they see a skin color. They see a percentage to meet their quotas of blacks that they had to get to keep their jobs. They don't see you as an individual person. And she is an excellent student, and she says, they don't see me. They don't see me and my accomplishments. My accomplishments mean nothing. In fact, they are diminished. Because when I go to that university, everyone is assuming that I'm there because I'm black. They don't assume that I'm there because I have good grades. So that diminishes you as a human person. And that takes me to the next training we have. It's called Effective Compassion Training after your principles. Your book also had a great influence in me. And what I think today is that we want to teach Christians to treat each person as unique and unrepeatable. And that every person made in the image of God has the capacity, the moral capacity of self-realization. We are engines of wealth production, waiting to be cranked, waiting to put into motion, and we don't realize it. And we feel sorry for people, and we herd people into these boxes of poor and rich that are totally meaningless. It doesn't mean anything to say the poor, especially in America. But if I say Juan Perez and his family, a poor family, then I'm talking about something, because I'm identifying an individual and his family and his specific personal situation. And that's what our training does, helps Christians and organizations begin to change the way they work with the poor.
So you can recognize diversity. It's there. It's
Yes.
clear it's there. But you really want to move to commonality.
Absolutely.
Or there's an expression, you're in the process of finishing a book.
Yes.
I've read a big chunk of it. And you talk about inclusive monoculturalism
Yes, exactly.
as opposed to the multiculturalism that we have. Could you explain that a little bit?
Well, multiculturalism tells us that we are they call it the salad bowl. You put different pieces in the salad bowl, but each piece remains itself. And they never really become one. So what is the tendency? The tendency is to isolate ourselves from each other. The tendency is to think that my culture is better than yours, or that mine is being oppressed by yours. So eventually, society breaks down into small segments. But when you talk about monoculturalism in America, it refers that we are one, and what makes us one as Americans? A set of principles about the human person and about government, about how we are supposed to treat each other, and what kind of society we believe in, informed by liberty and by compassion, by both. That is what unites us. That's what is mono. And then the inclusive means that whatever you bring with you to this country that is consistent with those principles is welcome in America. So if I eat a taco and it's nice and it's good and it's tasty, that doesn't break any principle of American exceptionalism. That's a contribution to what we are as Americans. And that's what I believe. Being American is a unique way of being human, in my opinion. And we need to all embrace that. If we don't embrace that, we will miss what it really means to be an American.
Yeah, and I like the way you start out in your new book, talking about the first Genesis account.
Yes.
On how humans were made male and female. We see this right in chapter 1, verse 27. And there's nothing there about black or white or yellow or red or anything. It's male and female. So there's our sexual realities, individuals. And there's really nothing about race there. And in fact, you go throughout the Bible, there's one point, there's a reference to the Ethiopian and so forth, but essentially the Bible's colorblind. And that's really remarkable. It runs so much against what we have in our society today, where we tend to think that the division into male and female is really not a solid division.
Yes, exactly.
And then we have a lot of emphasis on the racial divisions, which again, the Bible really doesn't think of anything significant at all.
Absolutely.
So,
and it's
yeah.
interesting that the different tribes that happen in Genesis happen after the fall.
Okay.
But the male and female identity of human beings happened before the fall. Yeah. So when everything was all good and perfect, we had that distinction between male and female. The distinction in tribes happens when sin comes in the world, when we begin to look more at what makes us different instead of what makes us one.
So to go to some recent politics, we have the slogan "Black Lives Matter."
Yes.
And I mean, I can certainly understand that after the difficulties and the shootings in various places. When you hear that slogan, what do you think about it?
Well, number one, there are polls that say that 70% of African Americans don't like it.
Okay.
You know, sometimes we hear to the media and we listen to the so-called leaders of Black America, and they don't represent anyone but themselves. You know, they are not necessarily speaking for all blacks in America. So most blacks reject that and prefer the idea of all lives matter. You're absolutely right. What you are trying to do is to call attention to the situation of Black Americans, then I understand it. But what is that situation? And when you study what that movement tells us, the situation is that you are privileged because you are white, you are inherently racist because you are white and you cannot do anything about it. We are victims, you are victimizers. And that is the kind of attention that they want for us. I say, forget about that. I don't need in my life more negativity. I don't need in my life more reasons to divide. So if that is the kind of attention you are calling to the realities of blacks in America, you are calling to the wrong kind of attention. What kind of attention we need? We need attention on entrepreneurs, on people who are succeeding, on people who are educating themselves in spite of the problems and difficulties, on the beauty that is within that community. That is the kind of attention we have. We don't need to, we are not eternal victims. You know, I'm tired of that people feeling sorry for us. But we have learned that there is power in victimization. If I make you feel guilty, and there's a lot of that in white people, you know, the reality is that every time there is a conversation about race between blacks and whites, the whites shut up and listen and acquiesce and nod their heads. They don't agree, but they're nodding their heads because that is what is expected. And so we don't have a real encounter between us where we are honest with each other and together try to find solutions to the problems we have. We can have change without insight. In other words, we don't have to unscramble the egg of history to then begin to move forward. we can begin to move forward now with the kind of society we have today. It is possible. And that's the kind of message we need to send, especially to the young African Americans. If you tell a young child, black child, that there is a white guy behind every tree just waiting to make your life miserable, what do you think that child is going to expect in life but to be a victim in wait? You know, that happened to me when I came to America. The moment I put I land my foot on America, I was decreed a victim by the law and given benefits when you had not done anything against me yet, and I was already decreed victim of America by government decree. And that is not the way that we can move forward. Yes, we need to acknowledge the wrong that has happened, absolutely. But when we dwell on that, that's when we lose the boat. I think that's when we miss the opportunities that are before us.
And is there some contradiction between the slogan Black Lives Matter and the really atrocious statistics of abortion in the black community, which would seem to suggest the corollary would be unborn black lives don't matter?
Absolutely. Exactly. Black lives matter as long as they are not in the womb. Black lives matter as long as a white person does something to us, but if we do something to each other, that's okay. For example, 6% of murders of African Americans and Hispanics in America today are performed by a white person. 6%. The other 94% is among each other. But you don't hear the slogan when that happens in our communities. And that happens day in and day out, day in and day out. Every weekend, every week in America, dozens and dozens of young people die in our streets. And you can go to the website of that initiative and you cannot find even a sentence about that reality. Not even a sentence about that reality. There's something wrong with that.
Yeah. I'll ask one more question, and then I'd like to open it up for any of you to ask questions. You write in this upcoming book that, and I'll quote here, the next great phase of the civil rights movement, an uncompromising personal responsibility movement. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, the civil rights movement was about giving us the rights as citizens that we deserve. You know, we were treated as less than other citizens, and that was wrong. We opened up the opportunities of us to be treated as citizens as equally as everyone else. However, we are missing the element of internal development. You know, E.W. Du Bois said that the problem was racism. Booker T. Washington said, I agree, the problem is racism and also black underdevelopment. In other words, we need to fight oppression, but more importantly, we need to develop ourselves. When I go to communities of color, if there is something around saying that there was a police officer who did something to a black person, I can gather 2,000 people for a protest. If a black child is murdered on the street by another black person and we do a march, we get 20 people in a good day. Yeah. And that is a kind of responsibility for ourselves that we need. I have spoken with so many older African Americans. You know what they tell me, Ismael? I long for the times of segregation. Not because they liked segregation, they hated segregation. But because we knew that we could not be held by the outside world, we gathered strength from each other. The church became the hub that united us. If I needed help, as you have said in your books, I will go to my pastor and my pastor will help me. But he will tell me, I want to see you on Sunday. You better treat that woman right. You better stay in the straight and narrow. And the family was strong. So we had these inner resources within the community that make us strong in spite of the actual racism and oppression that surrounded us. We need to go back to that kind of resilience. And that's what I mean. Yes, fight racism, but make that the scenery of the drama of black development. And that is what we need, the new phase and the last and most important phase of the civil rights movement.
Good. Questions?
I would imagine that most of the people here tonight are people who would say that the political theory of Karl Marx is fundamentally flawed and problematic. But I guess this question can apply to both of you guys. Do you guys think that Karl Marx got anything right? Or do you think that any of his critiques are valid or?
I don't know. I will say that one element that Marx had absolutely correct is that he understood the mystery of capital, the mystery of how wealth is created. Marx himself says that capitalism has created wealth as no other society has been able to produce. He understood that well, that there is something mysterious and profound about the economic activity. When you create wealth, there's something that is intangible, you know? And that's one of the problems we have also in the third world countries. You know, in the third world countries, for example, you have a piece of land and you don't have a title to that land. What do you have? A piece of land. You don't have more than that. But in economic freedom, in capitalist societies, you have a piece of land and a title to that land. And that title is more important than the tangible object. With that title, you can go to a bank and get a loan and start a business. So there is something mysterious there that Marx understood. The problem is that he confused what was the solutions to the problems of the economy, but he understood that perfectly well.
That's a good insight about economics. I'll just mention something culturally. As Christians, we know that this world is not our home. It's an enormously entertaining place, a place that we can exercise our creativity, a place where we can learn about God, and we can learn about man, and we can learn our desperate need for God. Marx had that sense of alienation, but instead of saying the world is not our home, he basically turned it into the capitalist world is not my home, and there's this other home that I can create. But man cannot create that. I mean, God is the great creator. Marx, by thinking that men could create a utopia, sort of like the later Leninist, John Lennon, where he talks, about imagine and so forth. It's the sense of alienation has some roots, but he misplaces by far the solution, and that's what Marx did, and that's in fact what John Lennon did, as well as the guy in the middle, Vladimir Lenin. So, other questions or comments?
Hi. Just a quick question for you, and that's with your institute, which sounds like it's accomplishing wonderful things. Have there been any successes? Or if not, how would you envision a community changing based on the ideas that you're propounding?
Great question. Yes, we have had great successes with churches and how they do things. Let me give you just an example. There is a ministry in Missouri that we began to work with, and they had a thrift store. And they used to just give food and give clothing away to the homeless and the poor. And after taking our training, they began to change the way they do things. Now they have a thrift store, and every piece of clothing in that store has a tag with hours of work that you had to give to get that piece of clothing. And then they have shops right there in the thrift store where they can go and work. And they work doing like coffee bags and jewelry that helps the ministry survive. So they help the ministry, and they sit down to work right there in the ministry, and the volunteers sit side by side them working together, getting to know them as persons. And they have now the dignity that they say, I earned this. No one just gave me these things like, I don't have something. what we have helped them is to realize that when a poor person comes to your ministry, they have something to offer. So it changes the exercise. Imagine I come to your ministry asking for help, and you're telling me that I have something that you need, that I have something to offer to you. That really strengthens your dignity as a human being, and then energizes you to produce even more, because now you realize that you can make it. So that's one of the things. We have another thrift store this is a soup kitchen in Fort Myers, Florida, where I am. And they have a plot of land on the side. And now the families that go to get food in a normal, consistent basis to that place. If you just come one day, we give you food. If you are hungry, how can I tell you no? I'm not going to give you a plate of food. But if you want to come here all the time, we have divided the plot, and we have given that family a piece of that plot that is theirs, 100% theirs. And we will pay their children to cultivate land. And we will open a savings account for that child to work. To earn money. And now they are working together, they own something, and now they can also come and have more dignity and say, I come to this thrift store to get food, but I am working for it. So that's the kind of neat, simple changes that we have done. There's another a church in this case. We have a club, it's called the Self-Reliance Club. 2 years ago, I went to a distribution of school supplies, and there was about 2,000 kids getting free school supplies, and I didn't like it. Why? It was 2,000 black and brown kids getting the cheap, free school supplies from a small cadre of white people. That's always the way it is. And what were the kids learning? Well, there is benefit at the end of the long lines of dependency. And there is benefit not coming from mom and dad. It comes from those strangers out there that have their stuff, and they're up here, and I'm down here on my knees asking for them. I hate their guts, and I still had to go to them for support. We decided, why don't we have them earn? Now we have 200 students in 11 public schools where they work on entrepreneurial initiatives at the school sites. They do urban gardening, crafts, beautification, service in the community. Again, and we pay them for their work. And at the end of the year, we transport 200 kids to BB&T Bank, our bank, where we hand them at the door their earnings, and they open their own savings accounts. And then they can take that money and buy their school supplies. The need is met, but now it's not a handout. They are learning the connection between reward and accomplishment. That is a kind of simple changes that you can do to a ministry that begins to include the poor in the process of helping themselves. It's baby steps, but one baby step leads to the other, to another, and to another. So we have in the local community a lot of success.
You also, in your new book, talk about toleration, which is another one of our holy words these days, and you talk about the problem of ideologically making that one of your lodestars. Could you talk about that a little bit?
About toleration?
About toleration.
Well, toleration simply means I put up with you. I don't necessarily have to admire you or like you. We need to go beyond that. We need to get to know people. That's what we need to get to know and understand each other. How can then I get to understand you if we have a true, sincere dialogue with each other? We have to be able to challenge each other and to disagree with each other and find commonality even in our disagreements. But toleration is a very low achieving expectation. We put with each other, And eventually, what happens with the tolerant society is that we tolerate only the things we like. So Christians are tolerated now, but eventually they will be persecuted. So toleration is just the first step before abolition.
Okay.
Question. When you're working with these children so that they can work to earn their own school supplies, how do the previous generations feel about that?
How
do the previous generations feel about that? What do they say when they show up with their children?
What I can tell you is that the most grateful parents I have seen are the migrant parents that are with our kids in our clubs, because they have had to go through a lot in life to be able to get a little bit in their hands. And they love the idea of the kids earning their way out of poverty. Sometimes in those migrant homes, the first time that there is a bank account in the family is the child in our club. The family doesn't have a bank account. So they say, thank you. Thank you for teaching this lesson to my child. You know? I have seen African American parents, especially men, ashamed when these ministries go and with all these presents in Christmas, when a husband cannot afford. You know what that does to the manhood, to your manhood? When you are supposed to be providing for your children and some stranger comes with shiny stuff for your family, that is devastating. Isn't it better to help that family meet the needs of the kids, or help the kids meet their own needs alongside with the parents? And that's what I can tell you, is a sense of gratitude. I am convinced that the poor want to work. Don't blame the poor because they are on welfare. They are just responding to the incentives we have put in front of them. If you are a poor person, you have needs today. You have to meet those needs for you and your family. So you create a system that gives you stuff, well, then I'm going to respond to the incentives that have been put in front of us. But my experience is that the poor want to work and they want a better system. Let me very briefly give you another example. When I was in the Catholic ministry, we had an after-school program. And two of the nuns I had in my ministry were convinced that we should not charge any money. It had to be free because these were poor African American kids. And I said, no, we don't have to charge a lot, but we need to charge, because when you pay for something, there's something there, it becomes part of you, and you take better care of that. You know what happened? Every single family paid. No one said anything against it. In fact, there was one family who said, you're charging $2 liters, I'm going to give you more. And there was another family that could not give food. You know what they did? They would bring pastries and things like that from time to time in gratitude for what they were receiving. You know, the poor want to work. The poor want to do the right thing. Is that we create systems that incentivize the opposite. You know, if you say to me, I'm going to take care of you, I'll let you. But if you tell me, no, we're going to work together, and you'll see that it's better, I am convinced that almost everyone responds to that incentive.
So I'll ask one more question here. Let me just read this statement, which I think was very interesting. In political markets, the continuation of the allocation of resources depends not on success, as indicated by profit, but on failure, indicative of a need for further allocation of resources. By placing the fate of Black America in political markets, we guarantee failure. Explain how we guarantee failure by that.
Again, because success is failure in government.
Okay.
That's the bizarre nature of government activity. What happens when a department in government says, you know, we have failed to feed people? What they do? They ask for what? more resources. And then they justify that they need more resources precisely because they failed. So we give them more money. But in the market economy, if you fail, you get out of the business, and someone else with a better idea comes, and they succeed. You see, that is the problem with political markets, and it's not just for the poor. You know who is also on welfare in America? The rich. Corporations know that they can go to government and get benefit. So why should I spend my time in creating the best product when what I need is the best friends in government? So I spend my time and my resources on lobbying those who have resources in government to give them to me. And that is a kind of welfare that weakens society. Why is that? Because now you are not looking out there to meet the needs of people. You're simply looking at who can I convince in government to give me a grant. Now, I had that situation some time ago. We went to the black community, and there were like 7 people who wanted to start businesses. And 3 of them were so adamant that they wanted grants, and only grants. They wanted me to write a check and hand it to them. There were 3 African-American people who said, I don't want a grant from you. Give me a loan. Give me a loan, because when you give me a loan, I know I have to repay it. So that puts the fire on my feet for me to succeed. And they succeeded. One of their restaurants is one of the best restaurants in town now. That is a kind of difference between political markets and economic markets. In political markets, the one who wins is the one who has more power to control the resources of another. In economic markets, the one who succeeds is the one who has the best ideas that can convince you to spend the money on me instead of spending the money on him. That is the difference between one and the other.
So communism and crony capitalism have the same root.
Absolutely.
In trying to get some special governmental preference,
Exactly.
rather than actually developing a product that people want to buy.
And the problem with socialists is that they are absolutely right about corporations, but they don't realize that the biggest corporation is government.
Yeah.
You know, they want to strengthen government and weaken corporations. That is not going to happen. As long as the government is strong and has benefits to give, there will always be people going there to get a piece of the pie. And that is what we need to do is to weaken government. Have government had less to give away. So you don't have any benefit in going there. So if your business is going to succeed, you better do a good job. You better convince people to buy your product. And that betters society, because the best ideas rise to the top, and we all benefit. In political markets, the ones with the power benefit. And that is detrimental to society. And I'm against welfare for the poor, not because I don't want to see the poor benefit and be fed, but because I respect their dignity as equals to me. And because I know that there is a better way to meet their needs than the systems we have created, that eventually will help them get out of poverty instead of managing their poverty. We have become poverty managers. You know, we give you food and more food, and we manage your poverty, and you stay poor but more or less well-fed, and the other gives you school supplies, the other gives you clothing, he gives you more food, the other pays your bills, free health care, the other pays your home. Why bother get out of poverty? Nothing is broken. All my needs are being met, so I stay there in poverty. But we had to make poverty uncomfortable. You need to hate poverty. That is the engine that will help you rise out of poverty, because you don't want to experience that. You have said that in one of the examples in your book. You know, if your soup kitchen serves food that is Ritz-Carlton quality food, if you give me Ritz-Carlton quality food for free, why should I go to work to get less quality food? You know, I stay at your food kitchen forever getting food. But that's not what we want for the poor, to be going to very nice soup kitchens. That's not what I want for the poor. I want for the poor to end their poverty so they can take care of themselves and they don't need me anymore. Now, our success should be when our jobs are written off. That's it. But that's not what happens, you know? And in my area, every time the schools are coming, I always say, read the newspaper, because there will be a lot of stories that make you cry to get into your pocket. And that's what the nonprofits do. The nonprofits don't want less poor people. Why? Poor people is what brings money in. They want more poor people to raise their budget. So they are invested in the very problem that they're supposed to fix. And that is, what does that? Perpetuates poverty. And that's not the way to do it.
And that is often the case, and we want you to be comfortable as you travel, and perhaps if you have some Ritz-Carlton food, a place to carry it around. So here's a little gift for your coming here, a Patrick Henry College backpack.
Oh, wow, thank you.
Suitable for carrying many things. Please join me in thanking Ismael Hernandez.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, man.